We start the second line from the top. The Gamora quotes the Mishnah, Echad Hama'ara ve'echad agoimer kona. Whether a person engages in a partial act of intimacy or a complete act of intimacy, there is acquisition. That's as far as a literal translation is concerned. We're dealing, of course, with the continued topic of a brother-in-law marrying his sister-in-law after his brother died, leaving no children, the act of yibum, in order to concretize the yibum relationship. So the act of intimacy is the instrument through which that is accomplished. And our Mishnah tells us that even if the act of intimacy is not a complete male organ insertion, it nevertheless kana, it is effective. Before we continue in the Gamora itself, let us glance at the side. We have a topic heading, which we entitle Bi'a Grua Bi'avama. An act of intimacy where the intention was not, we'll say, of a mitzvah orientation. For example, we saw expressions in the Mishnah, shogeg, mezid, oinis, rotzon. Shogeg is where he doesn't think that it's even his Yevamo, he thinks it's his wife, and it turns out to be his sister-in-law. Or mezid, he has harlotrous intentions, znus intentions, and not intentions of actual consummation of marriage. So that we term a bi'a grua, low-level act of intimacy with a Yevamo. So we are taught that it's kana, that acquisition takes place. The Gemara will be asking, what do you mean she is acquired? So we'll see a machlokis Rav and Shmuel. Rav says kana lakol means that the Yevamo, the sister-in-law, becomes the surviving brother's full-fledged wife. Shmuel, on the other hand, will say kana rak lidvorim ha'amurim beparsha, and they are aleph. One is mirash benichsei ochiv. That gives him the right. First of all, the dvorim ha'amurim beparsha is that the Torah speaks about the yavam taking over the name of the brother, and we learn from the psukim yokum al shem ochiv, that would mean that he inherits him, and lefotra min hayibum, that would mean that any of the other brothers, if there are surviving brothers, or if there are any co-wives, they are now exempt. That even though the act of consummation was without pure mitzvah intent, but rather, as we said, it was shogeg or mezid, the other terms we saw in the Mishnah, it works to exempt any of the other co-widows from the mitzvah of yibum. However, avol eino machila b'truma, if it's a kohen that's now marrying the Yevamo, the brother, dealing with the brothers that were kohanim, this kind of lack of intention type intimacy will not entitle her to eat truma. We'll see more of that when we get into the Gamora. Of course, truma is the tithe that is given to kohanim, and only kohanim are allowed to eat from it. And when we say only kohanim, it means to the exclusion of non-kohanim. However, if someone is, let us say, the wife of a kohen, so she is entitled to eat of truma as well. We will see a structural note under the mivneh heading. Roman numerals 1 and 2 appear. So they represent shnei lishonos, two versions. Mosai cholkim Rav u'Shmuel. Under what circumstances do Rav and Shmuel actually argue with one another? Roman numeral number 1 is shenofla min ha'erusin. That we're talking about a widow who had only reached the first stage of marriage with her husband. Of course, he dies leaving no children, but if they only entered erusin, that means they never consummated their marriage in the first place. The second lashon in the Gemara, which is almost halfway down the page, you'll notice a squiggle underlined Ika the Amri expression, means there are those that say that Rav and Shmuel argue under different circumstances. That's shenofla min hanisuin, that she became a Yevama when she had actually consummated her first marriage. She'd been a full wife of the first husband. Now, we've mentioned this point many, many times in the past, so I certainly don't want to dwell on it again, so as not to bore non-first-time listeners, but the Jewish institution of marriage, technically speaking, is accomplished in two stages. There's erusin, sometimes referred to as kiddushin, where a man offers a woman money as one of the means of establishing erusin. At that point, she becomes forbidden to other men. She's considered married, but she's not to live in intimacy with her husband yet until nisuin. And nisuin is usually associated with chuppah, where the couple stand under a canopy, a marriage canopy. There are other definitions of what that might be, but for the sake of simplicity, that will suffice. Now we turn to the Gemara. The Gemara asks, "My kona," and Rashi defines that this question is being asked under the circumstances of what we call a bia grua. What is acquired with this low-level type of intimacy that we described before? So, Rav Omar, kona lakol, that even though it's a low-level type of intention with regard to the act of intimacy between the Yavam and the Yevama, nevertheless, she becomes his full-fledged wife. Ushmuel Omar loy kona elo ledvorim hoamurim beparsha. The acquisition or the marriage, it accomplishes only the points mentioned in the Torah regarding a Yavam and Yevama, but not a full across-the-board marriage. Again, we're dealing with this type of marriage which is consummated here with a bia grua. And what are the things that are mentioned in the parsha? Now, Aleph, lirash benichsei achiv. He is now entitled to inherit his brother's properties. Ulefotra min hayibum, and to exempt any other co-wives from the mitzvah of yibum. Now, as we said before, this is the beginning of two lishonos. Min hanisuim l'divrei hakoil ochla deha havis kochla meikara. If she became a Yevama, because she had already been fully married to the first husband, everyone will agree, meaning even Shmuel will agree, she's entitled to, ochla means she's entitled to partake of truma, and I don't think we mentioned that a moment before, but we said, according to Shmuel, the bia grua entitles her to the things that are stated in the parsha, namely to inherit the Yavam, the brother now inherits his deceased brother, and exemption from yibum for other parties concerned. But if he's a kohen, the woman will not be able to partake of truma. The Rashi in Dibur Mascha Amurim Beparsha says these points Beparshas Yivmin Shikosav Ba Mikrozeh Yevamo Yavo Elel the Darshinon Lei, from the pasuk of Yevamo Yavo Elel we understand Bein B'Shogeg, Bein B'Mezid, Bein B'Oinus, Bein B'Rotz, and those are all the Bia Geruah examples. However, as we said, she is not going to be entitled to eat from truma. However, and now this is the point the Gamora just made, minha nisuin, if she becomes a widow after having had a nisuin level relationship with her first husband, though he died leaving no children, she, upon marriage to this brother through even the bia grua, ochla, she is entitled to eat from the truma. She was eating as a married woman to her first husband. So she simply continues that which she was already doing. So that if you have a woman who's married to a kohen in a nisuin fashion, in other words, fully married, they having consummated their marriage, so now she simply continues with her second husband, the brother of the deceased husband, continues doing what she was doing beforehand. Ki pligi, the machloikis between Rav and Shmuel, where Rav says she is entitled to eat and Shmuel says she's not entitled to eat from the truma. This is min ha'erusin, when she becomes a widow after having only reached the first stage of marriage with her first husband, only the erusin stage. Rav Omar oicheles. Rav says that even though with her first husband she wasn't eating of truma, with the yavam she will. The haravi rachmana bias shogeg kamezid, because the Torah treats the bias shogeg, this unintentional intimacy, as if it was with intention. Now the term mazid over here, I believe, means something with intention. The term mazid that we saw in the Mishnah is a reference to an act of intimacy with znus intentions. So I'm not sure that that's what the word mazid means over here. I think that mazid means something with intention of doing the mitzvah. The Torah simply says that even if it's unintentional, the act of intimacy between the yavam and yavama, it's as good as if it had full intention. And something that has an act of intimacy with a yavam and yavama with full intention certainly entitles her to eat truma. Ushmuel Omar, and Shmuel says, as far as that's concerned, ki ravi rachmana, when we say that the Torah includes shogeg, the unintentional, like intentional, leukme b'mokoim baal, to establish the yavam in the position of the first husband. And as such, with the first husband, she was only at the erusin stage, and therefore was not eating truma yet. One does not eat truma until knisa l'chuppah, until the nisuin takes place. So the Torah views the unintentional act of the yavam as being with intention. That's only to enable the yavam to be in the same position as the first husband. However, but to grant him greater strength, the power to enable her to eat from truma, that no. Let's take a look at the Rashi. If she was eating from truma while her husband was alive, namely she had been in a state of nisuin, so she'll continue eating now with the yavam, even though their bonding was a biagrua. Avalalumi mibal, but to make the yavam stronger than the husband, when her husband was alive, she wasn't eating from truma. A woman does not partake of truma until she enters the marriage canopy. Hi nami lo olim mine. This too, the biagrua yavam, also isn't going to be stronger than that. V'dafka b'bia below das kinyan. All of that which we've said till now is when we're dealing with exactly this, a biagrua, which would be an intimacy without acquisition intention. Acquisition meaning to create a husband-wife relationship. Avol b'bia Gamora, but with an act of intimacy with intention to create a husband-wife bond. Ishto Gamora hi v'ocheles afilu l'shmuel. She would. A Yevamos is a full-fledged wife, and even Shmuel will acknowledge that she will eat truma. We continue in the Gemara. V'ozda Shmuel litamei, and Shmuel, in saying what he has just said, that the Yavam is not going to be stronger than the original husband, is consistent with what he has said elsewhere. The Omar of Nachman, Omar Shmuel, Kol shehabal machil Yavam machil. Any situation that the husband enabled his wife to partake of truma, so a yavam can do so. V'chol shein habal machil, if the husband was not enabling the wife to eat truma, we said the husband reached only the erusin stage, yavam eino machil, a yavam. Now the ikr we have to add between the lines, and Rashi adds this, the yavam through biagrua is not machil. Meisvei, we raise a question. You'll see after the framed source that the problem is with Shmuel. So you have a Tanaic source. It says Bas Yisrael Pichis. Pichis means fully sane and aware, cognizant individual, a normal, healthy person. A Bas Yisrael Pichis Shinis Arsa L'Kohen Pikeach, and she entered Erusin with her husband, a Kohen, was also normal. However, unfortunately, he wasn't reach the koinsas to take her in. That would be the nisuin. He didn't reach nisuin until he first became a cheresh, a deaf mute. And in halacha, deaf mute is considered a person lacking full cognizance and awareness. People that are classified as lacking da'as are not capable of creating kinyonim, clinching deals. So in this case, the first stage of their marriage took place in a state of health. However, before the chuppah, he lost it. He became a cheresh. Eino oicheles. She does not eat from truma. Meis v'nofla lifnei yavam cheresh. The husband that we said that had become a cheresh died after he did chuppah. And let us emphasize that before he died, it was a situation where she was not allowed to eat from truma. Let's also add an important point that intimacy with a cheresh is in the same category as the other examples of bia grua, bia shogeg, znus, and oinus, situations where there's no kavana, there's no intention for acquisition, for concretizing deals. So we have a husband dying where she was not eating from truma. She fell to a yavam who happened to also be a cheresh, and it says oicheles, she eats from truma. Upon having intimacy with the brother-in-law cheresh, she eats from truma. Ubezu yafe koyach hayavam mikoyach habalin. We see in this strength greater of the yavam than that of the baal, the husband. Bishlama l'Rav Nicha. This fits well into the scheme of things as Rav sees it. Rav had no problem giving greater strength to a yavam than the original husband. We saw in the case of a husband where they reached Erusin, so she was not eating of truma. Erusin does not entitle a woman to eat from truma. And yet, Rav said that the yavam that marries her with a bia grua, she is able to eat from truma. So this fits into the scheme of things as far as Rav is concerned. Yavam having greater strength than the Baal. Ela l'shmuel kasha, but according to Shmuel we have a difficulty. Here we have a situation with her original husband, she was not enabled to partake of truma. And now with the Yavam, who's a cheresh, she is able to. Omar loch Shmuel. So Shmuel responds, he says, Eima hachi. Restate the source thusly. V'lo hispik l'koinsa. I hope everyone realized we're rereading the frame source from just a couple lines above. We're continuing now with a reread. V'lo hispik l'koinsa achin is charesh eino chels b'truma. This is the same as we saw above. If the kohen pikeach that did erusin with her becomes a cheresh before knisa, before the chuppah, she does not eat from truma. However, if we switch the order of things, kines v'achar kach nischaresh. First there was chuppah, he was still normal. He was still a pikeach. And then nischaresh, ocheles, she eats from truma. The fact that afterwards he became cheresh, that doesn't stop her from eating truma. Meis v'noflu l'fnei yavam cheresh. That same husband, he died. And she falls to a brother-in-law that's a cheresh, oicheles. She eats from truma. She was eating from truma with her husband, so she's continuing on the same level with the yavam. My bizu. Where do we see an illustration here of yavam being greater than husband? And if anything, yavam is at the same level as original husband. We have a little arrow, by the way. You could see where we saw the line in the original source above, where it said "Bezu yafe koyach hayavam." Where do you see yafe koyach hayavam? Yafe meaning greater. Yavam having greater power. Where do we see that? Answer: De'ilu bal cheresh meikara lo yocheles. If a woman was marrying a kohen that happened to be a cheresh, and he was a cheresh, their original marriage was while he was a cheresh. So the husband started off as a cheresh. She wouldn't be able to eat from truma. Vilu yavam cheresh meikara. Here she does yibum with a person that's already a cheresh. He starts off as a cheresh, and achla, she's able to eat. So that you see, a baal cheresh meikara does not enable her to eat. A yavam cheresh meikara entitles her to continue eating from truma. V'ika the amri, and another version. Min ha-erusin, if she became a yavama from a state of erusin, divrei hakol lo achla. Even Rav will agree that she does not eat from truma. Dahalo achla b'chaye baal. She wasn't eating truma with her original husband. And again, we emphasize that through the bia grua with the yavam, she is not going to eat from truma. After all, she wasn't eating from truma with her original husband. They had only reached erusin. Ki pligi. When does the machlokes Rav and Shmuel arise? Min hanisuin, where she became a yavama after having been a nesua to her first husband. Rav Omar oicheles. Rav says that even though it's a bia grua, she will be able to eat from truma. Tohava ochla meikara. She was eating as a nesua to her first husband. She shouldn't lose out, so to speak, and she continues eating truma with the yavam, even though their bonding was a bia grua. Shmuel Omar eino oicheles. She is not entitled to eat. Ki ravi rachmona bias shogeg kemezid. When we say that the Torah views the bias shogeg, the unintentional type bonding, as if it had intention, that's l'dvarim amurim b'parsha. That's as far as the points that the Torah recognizes in a yavama. For example, the yavam can inherit his brother, and other co-wives, co-widows are now exempt from yibum. Avol l'chol mili lo, but to say that the Torah recognizes bia grua to enable them to be considered husband and wife across the boards for everything, that no. The Gamora asks, Omar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, Kol shehabal ma'achil, yavam ma'achil. If the Baal entitled her to eat truma, the yavam will entitle her to eat truma. So how can we say here that when she became a yavama from Nisu and she was eating with her husband, how can Shmuel say that she doesn't eat now? Shmuel himself, notice where we underlined Shmuel's name, Shmuel himself said that if the Baal had entitled her to eat, the yavam will also. So the Gemara answers, a restatement of what Shmuel had said. Kol bia shabal ma'achil ba, yavam ma'achil ba. Any type of intimacy that a husband was enabled to feed his wife truma, so then the yavam can do so. So now, what type of intimacy was the Baal? Did the Baal do that enabled her to eat from truma? So it would be a regular, full-fledged, intentional bia with chuppah. Chuppah means they had, as Rashi says, bias chuppah. There was a marriage canopy, and afterwards they had intimacy. It was a straightforward, intentional type of intimacy. So intimacies that with husband entitled her to eat from truma, similar intimacies with yavam will entitle her to eat from truma. What we mean is a intimacy with intent. But an intimacy where a husband would not have entitled his wife to eat from truma, so too ein hayavam ma'achil ba. The yavam likewise will not entitle her to eat from truma. Meisvei, we raise a Tanaic source again. It's actually the same source as we saw before in the first lashon. You might have noticed the bow tie marking, and that's what it is designed to do, to show that the same source that was used to ask on Shmuel in the first lashon, the Roman numeral number 1, we see here as well. So it says, Bas Yisrael pikchis shenis arsa l'koyin pikeach v'lo hispik l'koyin so'ad shenis charesh eino oicheles. The couple entered Erusin when they were both healthy. However, the Nisuin, which is, we'll say, the clincher for Truma eating purposes, well, that took place in where he had already taken ill. He became a Cheresh. So she's not entitled to eat from Truma. Meis v'nofla lifnei yavam Cheresh. If the Cheresh husband died and she became a Yevama to a brother-in-law who's also a Cheresh, Oicheles, she eats from Truma. Ubezu Yafe Koyach Yavam Mikoyach Baal. Here the Yavam is enabling her to eat when the Baal did not enable her to eat. Now that last statement is what, technically speaking, is difficult even for Rav, because in this Lashon number 2, Rav acknowledged that if the Baal did not enable her to eat, the Yavam would not enable her to eat. And here we're saying a Baal did not enable her to eat, and the Yavam does enable her to eat. And yet the Gemara says, Bishlama l'Rav. This source is not a problem for Rav. Mitaretz kidetoretz meikara. Because what Rav can do is can reread this source as Shmuel had done in the first Lashon. That's where you notice the second frame on the page where the Gamora said, Eimahachi, what did we see over there? We saw there that the husband had actually first done the Nisuin, was Kines, and then took ill. And under those circumstances, so we say that the Cheresh is, the Yavam Cheresh is also enabling her to eat from Truma. So what Rav will do with this source is what we saw Shmuel doing in the first Lashon, and with that in mind, the Yavam is not on a higher level than the original husband by way of eating powers, but rather on the same level, where the original husband enabled her to eat Truma, the Yavam continues that which she was doing earlier. So that's, as far as Rav is concerned, the source doesn't pose a problem. Ela l'Shmuel kasha. But according to Shmuel, there's no way out. Meaning, Shmuel in the second Lashon said that even if the husband was enabling her to eat Truma, the Yavam will not, the Yavam, of course, with a Bia Grua, and here we're talking about the Bia of a Yavam Cheresh in this source, it's also a Bia Grua, does enable her to eat. So just to go over that point again, according to Shmuel, even though she was eating Truma by her husband, if there is a Yavam Bia Grua that takes place, she is not entitled to eat. Here we have a case of her eating by her husband, and then the Yavam Cheresh, which constitutes a Bia Grua, she is able to eat. So Ela l'Shmuel kasha. So Gemara says kasha. This is left as a difficulty. But it doesn't necessarily present a refutation of Shmuel, but it presents a difficulty. Before we continue with the next section of Gamora, we glance at the side where we have a nosei mivneh heading, topic heading, and structural note combined into one. You notice a crown shape. This represents deois lahasbir, opinions to explain machlokes Rav Nassan v'Rabbanan, the controversy between Rav Nassan and Rabbanan in a source that we'll see shortly. Be'inyan kayin pikeach shes Arias in Bas Yisrael pikches. Similar to what we saw in the previous discussion, a healthy Kohen marrying or reaching Erusin with a Bas Yisrael was also normal. Pikches is normal. But he didn't consummate the marriage while still healthy. He first became a Cheresh. Ma dina legabi achilas truma. What is the law regarding her eating of truma? It should be obvious that this discussion is not Yavam related, but it certainly fits into the scheme of the previous sugya by way of eating of truma. The squiggle underline will appear in the Gemara as Hadgoshas Abaye. We'll be emphasizing Abaye's name with this marking, chemaskiff as Shnei HaEsberim b'malach HaGamora. He will be the one questioning the explanations given by the Gamora. So once again, we have a machlokes Rabinosan and Chachamim. What is the hesber of that machlokes? And Abaye attacking the hesber, as we will see. The Gemara. Tana Rabbanan. Bas Yisrael pikris shenis arsa l'koyin pikeach. Two healthy people, male, female, enter Erusin in a state of pikhus. He happens to be a kohen. A kohen would eventually enable his wife to eat from truma. V'lo hispik l'koinsa ad shenis charesh. But he became a cheresh before the knisa. So eina ochelis. She does not get to eat from truma. Nolad lo ben ochelis. If she bears a child with the kohen, so in the merit of the child, the mother is entitled to eat from truma. Meis haben. Now, then the child dies. The mother surviving her son. Rabinosan Omar ochelis. V'chachamim omrim eina ochelis. My time of the Rabinosan. What is the reason behind Rabinosan, who says that even though the son, which seemed to be the vehicle through which she was able to eat the truma, he disappears, he dies, she continues eating? Omar Rabbo, so Rabbo tells us Hayil Shikvar Ochla, simply based on this type of logic that since she was eating, she continues eating. Omar Le Abai has a question, you notice it lasts a couple of lines. He says, well, using your logic of Shekvar Ochla, Elo Me'ata, Bas Yisrael, Shenises L'Kayin, U'Mislei. A Bas Yisrael is a woman who is a Yisraelis. She comes from a non-Kohen family. She married a Kohen, and the husband, the Kohen dies. Teichol. Do you think she continues eating from truma? She comes from a non-Kohen family. She's now a widow. Her husband, the Kohen, died. Do you think she continues eating truma? Techol shekvar ochla, based on this logic that since she had been eating, she continues eating. Since he died, so the Kohen sanctity that she had departs. It expires. Hacha nami. So too over here, kevon de mislay, the son dies. Paka kedushase mina. Whatever kahuna sanctity that she had through her son expires. So how can Rabinosan say she continues eating based on what Rabba says since she had been eating? We see that svara of shikvar ochla doesn't hold water. Elo Omar Rav Yosef Kosovar Rabinosan Nisue Cheresh Ma'achilin Betruma. This is a rather abbreviated comment, but we have to add that since the Kiddushin, since the initial marriage was done by two healthy people, and on a Torah level, and this is a new point we did not mention before, we have been mentioning from the beginning of today's shir that in Erusin a woman does not eat from truma even though her husband to be is a Kohen. She from Erusin she doesn't eat from truma. She waits till Nisuin. And now we will introduce the new point that din is only the Rabbanan, because Mido Raisa, from the Torah standpoint, the Pasuk says v'kohen ki yikne nefesh kinyan kaspu yochabo, that when a Kohen acquires, and Erusin constitutes acquisition, he marries a woman, they create a marital bond that way. Technically speaking, she is from that initial point allowed to eat from truma. The Rabbanan ruled that since she's still in her father's house, who's a non-Kohen, she might, if she's going to receive truma parcels, she might share them with her family members, and they're not entitled to it. So rabbinically, a woman from Erusin is deprived, is blocked from eating the truma, even though, again, from the Torah, she would be allowed to. So Rabbi Nelson figures like this: a nisue cheresh Nisuin, she means she enters the house of her husband. It's true he's become a cheresh beforehand, but that doesn't prevent her eating of truma, because on the Torah level she was entitled to eat anyway, while from the point of kiddushin, of erusin. And the Gamora goes on, Rabbi Yosef goes on to say, V'lo gazrinon, we don't impose a gezerah, a rabbinic restriction, nisui cheresh otu kiddushay cheresh. Now, a kiddushay cheresh, that type of kiddushin is not recognized as a Torah level marital bond, and a kiddushin of a cheresh would not enable her to eat from truma, even though the cheresh might have been a kohen. That wouldn't have enabled her to eat from truma. That having been said, in our case, he was a pikeach at the time of kiddushin. So on the Torah level, the truma ball started rolling. She enters nisuin. It's true he's a cheresh, but from the Torah perspective, she's allowed to eat from truma anyway. Plus, she's not by her family anymore. She's nisuin. She's entered the home of the husband, who is a kohen, who himself, of course, is allowed to eat from truma. So she is now able to eat from truma. There's no reason to make a gzera, claims Rav Yosef. The Gemara continues. Omar le Abaye, ihachi. If this is the explanation of Rabinowsan, nolad law ben lomali. Notice the little star to the side of the Gemara text. You can just align this with the star above. The Gemara, in the Tanaic source we opened this section of Gamora up with, there was reference to her non-eating of truma, and then a son was born and she was able to eat from truma. What does the birth of the son have to do with anything? As far as Rabbi Nelson is concerned, the Nisue Cheresh enabled her to eat from the truma. Why does, according to Rabbi Nelson, why is there any need to have the birth of a son for her to be able to eat from the truma? The Gemara says, you're right. Mishum Rabbonon. The source inserted this idea of her having a son, enabling her through him to eat from truma. That was because of the Shlita of the Rabbonon. The Rabbonon who held that the Nisue Cheresh does not entitle her to eat from truma, but with the birth of the son, she can eat from the truma. The Gemara asks, for Lifloig Rabinosan Alaihu Bereisha, why didn't Rabinosan state his case, state his opinion earlier? Namely, at the point in the source where it had said, Lo hispik l'koin sa'at shenis charesh, so Rabbi Nassan should have said at that point, O cheles. What's the structure of the source seems to be inconsistent. It's lacking balance or lacking flow. The Gamora answers, true, Rabbi Nelson could have said his point earlier, however, Shavik Lahu L'Rabbanon, Ademesaimi Milsaihu, Rabbi Nelson remained silent. He let them finish off their point. V'hadar Pologalayu, and then he entered with his argument, his alternative opinion, his differing opinion. So now, the structure is beginning to unfold, that Rabbi Nassan didn't enter his argument or his disagreement until later in the discussion. Well, if that's the case, there still remains something uncomfortable about the structure of that source. If Rav Nassan is really waiting till the Rabbanan finish their points, so listening, the source should have read as follows: Meis haben eina oicheles. That's the Shlita of the Rabbanan. Rabbi Nassan omer ocheles. Rabbi Nassan should have appeared at the end. And yet Rabbi Nassan, in the case of Meis haben, he wasn't waiting for the Rabbanan to finish everything they had to say. He appears before the Rabbanan's opinion there. So how can you explain the structure of the source by claiming that Rabbi Nelson was waiting for the Rabbanan to finish their point? Now we take a look at Rashi at the bottom, second line from the bottom. If Rabinosan is really waiting for the Rabbanan to finish their point of view, listening Meis haben eino ocheles, Rabinosan omer ocheles, teteve kula milsa de Rabbanan kechada, so that the entire position of the Rabbanan would be presented in one unit. V'hodar liflog Rabinosan akula, and then Rabinosan should have come in with his argument, with his point of view, disagreeing with the Rabbanan on all points. Namely, as far as lo hispik l'koin sachin is charash eino ocheles, Rabbi Nelson would have been able to say, yes, she is ocheles, and the case of nolad lo ben, and then meis haben, she would be able to eat as well. Avol hashta leko lemeimar denotar luhu asima, but now the way things are structured, as we pointed out, Rabbi Nassan appearing before the Rabbanan, we can't say that Rabbi Nassan is waiting till they finish their opinion. Uvemeis haben l'chuda polig. And now this is the main point. That's why we learned the Rashi. It turns out that Rabbi Nassan really argues only in the case of meis haben. However, as far as lo hispik l'koin sa'ashin is charesh, as far as that is concerned, apparently Rav Nassan agrees that if the nisuin took place after he had become a cheresh, so Rabbi Nassan agrees eino ocheles. It would seem that the svara for that is, just like we said earlier within the Rabbanan, that when you have the nisuin taking place with a man that has already become a cheresh, the Rabbanan tell us ein ocheles, because they would make a gzera of nisue cheresh atu kiddushe cheresh, and Rabbi Nassan, unlike Rav Yosef's claim, Rabbi Nassan would agree with that gezerah. We continue now in the Gemara. V'chein habo al achas mikol ha'Arias. The Mishnah had mentioned that not only with regard to Yavam and Yevama do we say that the less than complete type of intimacy clinches the Yibum Yevama relationship, but the same halacha will apply regarding all kinds of intimacies that are of a forbidden nature, where the violation will take place even if it's a type of intimacy other than, we'll say, the complete full intention act. Omar Rav Amram Ha Milsa Omar Lon Rav Sheshes. The following Rav Sheshes says, Ve'anharinu la'ainin mimasnisin, and he enlightens our eyes. In other words, he bases what he is about to say on a Tanaic source. Now, it's a beautiful expression. He enlightens our eyes. It might be noteworthy that Rav Sheshes himself was a blind individual, so that this expression takes on and we'll say an added dimension. What does Rav Sheshes teach us? Ashes, and do note, by the way, that this is a long point. Ashes Yisrael shenensa, a woman married to a non-Kohen, a married woman who was raped by some other man, even though she is allowed to go back and live with her husband as husband and wife. By the way, in contrast to a woman married to a Kohen who is raped, she becomes forbidden to her husband, the Kohen. Here we're not talking about an Ashes Kohen, we're talking about a woman who is married to a Yisrael, and she happened to be raped. Even though she's usher to her husband, psula lekuna. When that husband dies, if that husband eventually dies, she can no longer marry a Kohen. Vitana tuna, and from the Tanaic source that we saw back on Daf Nun Gimel Amud Beis, we see this point. And it says, this is a quote from the Mishnah, V'chein habo al achas mikol ha'aroyos ha'amuros b'Torah o psulos pasla. Just like we saw by the Yevama, all kinds of examples of let's say incomplete acts of intimacy. The same applies to all the Arias and psulos, and eventually the Mishnah says the woman is then pasla, disqualified. Before we can go further in the Gemara, we must take note of the structure. On the side we have a nosei mivneh heading. Triangles will appear immediately. These are nisyonos lahabzbir ma ba dine bia biyavama lelamed bedine bia b'shar Arias upsulos. The Mishnah had featured the laws of intimacy between Yavam and Yevama, and then from Yavam Yevama we're going to carry over the standards set by Yavam Yevama to other areas. That's the v'chein haba, namely, just like Yibum, so too by other areas. So the triangle will highlight, and as you go down the Gemara, you can see the number of attempts. What is it? What point about Yibum are we using to teach, to shed light on other areas? So now our Gamora continues. My v'chein. What does the v'chein in this source indicate? My lav. Is it not so that lo shna b'shoygeg v'lo shna b'mezid v'lo shna b'oines v'lo shna b'rotzon? Those are points that we found by the Yevama. That a Yavam that has intimacy with the Yevama, no matter if it's shogeg, mezid, and we explain unintentional, and mezid meant with znus intentions, lo shna ba'oines, and that we dashed underline here. That's the main thing for right now. It doesn't matter if it was oines, it was something beyond control, and lo shna ba'rotzon. That consummates the Yavam marriage, and the Mishnah went on to say same thing with regard to other areas where laws of intimacy are applicable. V'kotani pasla, and it says that she becomes disqualified. So what are we talking about? We're talking about Arias right now. What's Arias? Forbidden relations. Women that are forbidden. A married woman is an Esor, is a forbidden woman to have intimacy with. Married, of course, with intimacy with another man. And what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says that whether it's shogeg, mezid, or even if it's oines, it's a rape. Pasla, she becomes disqualified. What does that mean, disqualified? Disqualified from what? She's allowed to be with her husband. Disqualified means disqualified from the kahuna. This is exactly what Rav Shesha said before, that a woman married to Yisrael, and she's subjected to a forbidden act of intimacy against her will, ba'oines. True, she's allowed to be with her husband, the Yisrael, the non-Kohen. However, she becomes pasla, disqualified from the kuna. So which Rav Shesha said, you can see, is alluded to in the Mishnah. That's what Rav Shesha, that's what the Gamora said. He enlightened us. His teaching was based on that which was found in the Mishnah. The Gemara says, "Lo, that's not the way to learn things." My v'chein, when the Mishnah is paralleling the laws of Yibum to the laws of other areas of intimacy, it's ahera'ah. It's talking about partial insertion, partial male organ insertion, a topic we spent quite a bit of time in recent shurim talking about, and it is learned from Yibum that just like the partial ha'ara, the partial act of sexual intimacy is done with this partial male insertion, but b'rotzon, willingly. We have to emphasize that it's done willingly. So too, this will have halachic ramifications with other Arias. Now, what does the posla mean? So it very simply, if a woman who is forbidden with the man, and the man does he'ora with her, and they're willing partners, it's done b'ratzon, she becomes classified as a zoina in the Torah. The word zona has ramifications for kohanim. She becomes classified as a zona, and hence she is posla min hakahuna. Let's continue. He'ora deman. The he'ora of whom? Who do you have in mind? Is it like we just explained? Arias. If you're saying that it's the hara of Arias, meaning that we're going to learn the rules of hara with a forbidden woman from the laws of Yibum. L'meimra da Arias yalfinon mi Yevamos. Are you telling me then that the laws of Arias are in this realm regarding hara are learned from the laws of Yibum? Adarabah, to the contrary, Yevamos yalfinon me Arias. The laws or the concept of ha'ora by Yibum is derived from Arias, not that Yevamos teaches me about Arias, but the other way around. Arias teaches me about Yibum. The ikar ha'ora b'Arias ksiv, the main source for ha'ora, for partial connection as being considered full-fledged connection, is featured in the Torah in the realm of Arias. And it's from there that I derive information to Yibum. The structure of the Mishnah, though, describes something else, where something about Yibum is the source from which I will learn to Arias. So we have to come up with a new explanation. Ela mai v'chein asheloi kedarka da Arias. Namely, just like by Yibum we make no distinction whether it's kedarka or shelo kedarka, whether the male intimacy is conducted through the female orifice of reproduction or the other orifice that exists on her anatomy, that's shelo kedarka. So too, when it comes to Arias, the bio shelo kedarka will be treated as if it's bio kedarka. So what are we saying? We're saying that the laws of Yibum vis-a-vis bio shelo kedarka are then the source for bio shelo kedarka when it comes to Esor relationships. The Gamora says that can't be the pshat. Adarabah. To the contrary, ikar mishkevei isha b'Arias ksiv. The mishkevei isha is a quote from the pasuk, and it's from that expression we include bio shelo kedarka. And that's in the realm of forbidden intimacies, not Yibum. So that to suggest that the laws of Bia Shelo Kedarka are learned from Yibum to Arias, that cannot be. Elamai v'chein asheloi kedarka the chayvei lavin. Chayvei lavin are forbidden relationships, but they're not called Arias. An example of chayvei lavin would be a widow that has intimacy with a kohen gadol, or a divorcee that has intimacy with a kohen, with a regular kohen. In the case of chayvei lavin, the term mishkevei isha doesn't apply. That doesn't appear. That is, it appears by Arias, not by lavin. So, how am I going to learn that? Let us say a kohen would do bia shelo kedarka with a grusha, that he would be subject to getting lashed. How will I know that bia shelo kedarka by chayvei lavin is considered an offense? Well, that I will learn from the fact that bia shelo kedarka is koine by Yibum. So after all is said and done, we explain the Mishnah from Daf Nun Gimel Amid Beis, and the expression v'chein abor lachas miklar ezemus b'torah psus, etc. And we apply that section as being information that we derive from Yibum concerning bia shelo kedarka with chayvei lavin, and By the way, so what does posla mean? That would mean, let's take for example an almona that experienced biyashol kadak with a kohen gadol. At that point, she would be considered posla. That would ruin her from the kahuna. We continue now in the Gemara. We have a nosei, a topic heading combined with a mivneh, a structural note. The diamond highlights Shnei Lishonos Shel Rabba, two versions of Rabba, Bedin Kohen Shebo Al Ishtoi Acharei Shenensa. Now we mentioned before that a Kohen whose wife is raped cannot continue living with her as husband and wife. She's forbidden. He has to divorce her. It's a tragedy, a human tragedy if such a thing happens, but that is what the Torah expects. That's the Torah's requirement. Let's say the Kohen continues living with his wife after she was raped. So version 1, Lashon 1, Loike Mishum Zoina. He deserves Malchus because of having what's considered relationship with a woman that's now classified as a zona. Now, some people might be partially familiar with modern Hebrew and the term zona and its alternative meaning, but I don't want to dwell on that. I don't even want to mention it because it can serve to confuse us. The term zona in most cases is a reference to a very specific category of halacha where a woman, because of a type of forbidden intimacy, she becomes disqualified from marrying kohanim. The second lashon talks about the kohen who has relations with his wife after she was raped, and there's malchus, there's lashing because of something called tum'ah. And that term, tumah, is found in the pasuk Acharei Asher Hu Tam'ah. We will also note structurally a trapezoid shape. This is designed havlotas. It's to highlight Rabbi Zero, chemaskiff es Rabba b'shnei halashonos. He will be attacking Rabba in both lashons, both versions. You can see that by scanning ahead of the Gamora. In lashon 1, Rabba says his point and Rabbi Zero attacks, and same thing after Rabba says his point in lashon number 2, Rabbi Zero attacks. And he will do so b'she'ela shenireh the Esor eishes kain shenensa have lav habo michlal asay davi asay ve'ein loikin. The nature of Rabbi Zero's question is that it's true that a Kohen is forbidden to be with his wife after she was raped, but how can you talk about the Kohen getting lashes if he is with her? The Esor it's a negative command that's derived from a positive command. And we'll see that in the Gemara. We haven't cited the sources yet. But based on an inference from a positive command, I derive that a Kohen whose wife is raped, the husband Kohen cannot be with her. That is called a lav habol michlal asay, and that's classified in halachic terms as an asay, as a positive command. Even though when describing the prohibition, we describe it in negative terms, that the Kohen is not to be with his wife, but nevertheless, the root of that halacha is from an inference drawn from a positive command, or language stated in the positive as opposed to negative, and inferences drawn from the positive that result in the negative nevertheless have the status of a mitzvahs asay. And for mitzvahs asay, for positive commands that are violated, there is no lashing. So now we continue with the Gemara itself. Omar Rabba Eishes Kohen Shenensa, a wife of a Kohen that was raped, and through that she becomes forbidden to her husband. Baila loike alel mishum zoina. if the husband has relations with her, he will be considered deserving of lashes for the intimacy with his wife, based on her being classified as a zona. And the pasuk says, "Zona lo ikachu." We will gain by looking at Rashi. Rashi is just a line or two down from here. The pasuk says Zoyna lo yikachu, ustam zoyna. The basic understanding of the word zona, hainu minaefes tachas baila. It's a woman that conducts herself in immoral ways and intimacy with other men while still married. Shetasa me'achar baila l'zarim. The word zona is, Rashi's explaining, I believe he's giving you the etymology, that it has to do with she errs from under her husband, errant ways, going to others, to strangers, zorim. V'zu, afal pi shenensa, here in the case of the Eishes Kohen, even though she's not errant, she was raped, it was beyond her control. Gabi kohen lo polig rachmona bein oines bein rotzon. The Torah, when it comes to kohanim, does not make a distinction between that which was oines, that which was a rape, versus that which was willing. Kidegamrinon mivihi lo oines basa. The pasuk that will be cited in the Gamora, in other words, that the Gamora is working with and will be cited in the Gamora, is that a woman becomes also to her husband when she was not grabbed, she was not raped. The word he, she, is miuta, is a limitation, mashma. He is Eishes Yisrael, that when it comes to a wife of a non-Kohen, Eishes Yisrael, a zar, who the Eish Chiluk bein nispasa lo nispasa, then we make a distinction between rape versus non-rape. The Torah tells us that if she was not raped, she becomes also to her husband, indicating that if she was raped, she's not also to her husband. But when is that distinction made? Only with regard to the wife of a non-Kohen, a Yisrael. Avol Eishes Kohen ein chiluk. But when it comes to the wife of a Kohen, we don't make that distinction. So now we go back to the Gemara. The Gemara asks, Mishum zoyna in Mishum tuma lo, is there lashing only because of that particular violation and not because of another violation that we call tuma? And Rashi gives us the background for that as well. There's a pasuk that says Acharei asher hu tama, from which we are marbe a sota, a married woman that was a participant in intimacy with another man. And it says there, lo yuchal baila, that her husband cannot be with her. So in the context of tuma, you find a lav, a negative command, lo yuchal baila. This information, of course, you can find in the Rashi. So we continue in the Gemara. Amo, so as a result of the Gemara's question, we say af mishum zoyna, that when Rabbah said his din, that Eishes Kohen Ensa Baila Loika Mishum Zoyna means even Mishum Zoyna, not only Malchus because of Tum'ah, Tum'ah is defilement, but also because of Zoyna. Mosiv Rabbi Zero. Notice the question lasts a couple of lines. The Rabbi Zero raises a question from the pasuk which says V'hi loy nispasa. If a married woman was not grabbed, but rather willingly participated in intimacy with another man, asura, then she is asur. Ha nispasa. From that we infer muteres. If a woman married to a Yisrael is raped, she's muteres, she's allowed to be with her husband afterwards. V'yesh l'cha acheres, there's another woman, she'afal pi she'nispasa asura, that even if she happened to be raped, she would be asur to her husband. Ve'zo, and what is that? Who is she? Zu Eishes Kohen. That's the case of a wife of a Kohen. Ve'lav habo michlal asay equals asay. A negative that's derived through an inference from a positive has the status of a positive. And as we explained earlier, there are no malkos, there are no lashings that accompany one who violates a positive command, something that has the status of a positive command. So how can we explain Rabbo's position of malkos when it would seem that there should be no malkos in the case of the husband who cohabits with his wife that happened to have been raped? Omar Rabba. So Rabba explains. You have to go back to the very beginning, so to speak, of this topic. Hakol hoyu bichlal zoina. We'll say all women that are say partners in intimacy while married. They're partners in intimacy with another man while married to their husbands. All women, regardless of intent or lack of intent or rape or whatever, all women are considered zoina. And now zona is a lav. Zona lo yikochu. That's a lav that applies to kohanim. So whenever you have a case of a woman that is married and she has intimacy with another man, she automatically is labeled a zona. When the Torah specifies with regard to wives of non-kohanim, it says Vihi loy nispasa, if she was willing, asura. Ha nispasa muteres, but if she was raped, she's muteres. Michlal di eishes kohen kide kaima kaima. We infer from that the wife of a kohen, she remains as the original intent was, namely that there is a lav, there is a negative command of zona lo yikachu, even if it happened to be a case of oines. So the point is that what Rabbo said can be justified. I don't know if it's easily justified, but as far as Rabbi Zero is concerned, he had a problem with this, but the Gamora feels we can justify Rabbo by pointing out that the halacha of an eishes kohen shenensa being usher to her husband is not a function of a lav habo michlal asay, but rather it reflects the original Esor of Zona. And that original Esor of Zona naturally is a loisas, is a negative command, and hence malchus when it's violated. The Ika di Amri, Omar Rabba, another version of Rabba, Eishes Kohen Shenensa, Baila Loike Aleo Mishum Tuma. The wife of a Kohen who was raped, and if the husband continues being with her in intimacy, he deserves lashing for violating Tum'ah. The Gemara asks, or the Gemara points out, not as a question, but benichusa, mishum tuma in, mishum zoina lo. That the only offense this Kohen is violating by being with his wife after she was raped is the violation of tuma, but she's not considered a zona. Alma, we see from this, be'oines lo karina be zona. That when it's true that the wife becomes also to her husband, but she doesn't gain that label, the label of being a zona. Mosiv Rabbi Zero. V'hi loy nispasa asura. Ha nispasa muteres. This, of course, is the same sources we saw above. The Torah describes a woman that was not grabbed, a woman that was not raped, a married woman that was a willing partner in intimacy with another man. She's usher to her husband. Ha nispasa muteres. However, if she was grabbed, if she was raped, she's muteres to her husband. And as we said before, the word vihi is a limitation expression, that this distinction is limited to one type of woman. There's another category, that even if she was raped, she's usher to her husband. And who is that? Zu eishes kohen. This is the wife of a kohen, where we will make no distinction. and a negative that's derived from inference from a positive has the status of a positive. In effect, we are saying that by the Eshes Yisrael, she is allowed to be with her husband. That's the positive. And we are inferring there's another woman, the Eshes Kohen, she cannot be with her husband. That's the negative. But as we said already several times, a lav habo michlala, say a negative that's derived from a positive, is an asay. Why then is there malkois? Omar Rabba. Hakol hoyu bichlal acharei asher hu tam'ah. Now the pasuk of acharei asher hu tam'ah, there is a negative command, lo yuchal baila, as Rashi quoted. So there's a lav over here. And as we saw explained earlier in the context of Zona, here we're using this svara in the context of tum'ah, that all women, all married women who were partners in intimacy with another man are considered tum'ah, tmeos. When the Torah points out that the wife of a Yisrael, if she was not raped, she's forbidden, but if she was raped, she is allowed to her husband. Michlal, the Eshes Kohen kidekaimo kaimo. The Eshes Kohen remains in the original spirit of things, where all women, even raped women who raped married women, are tumah. So she remains with that negative command associated with her, and therefore the husband of a Kohen who is married to a woman who happened to be raped, and if he has relations with her, he is guilty of the original Avera of lo yuchal baila, a straightforward negative command. If you want to say it in simpler terms, the exception to the rule is actually the Eshes Yisrael case, whereas the Kohen reflects the original negative command. And that's why there's Malchus. The Mishnah. Almona l'kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedyot, min ha'erusin, if they happen to be in a state of erusin, let us take for example an almona who's the daughter of a Yisrael. She's a widow, and she entered erusin with a kohen gadol. So even though that's considered an acquisition, there's tfisas kiddushin, that's kinyan kaspoi, she is not allowed to eat from truma. So you have these forbidden relations. An almona l'kohen gadol, she entered erusin with a kohen gadol, or a grusha v'chalutza that entered erusin with a kohen hedyot. She does not eat from truma. Rabbi Loza, Rabbi Shimon machshirin, they say she can. Now, we have stated in the past that these are forbidden relations. So one thing is for sure: if an almona with a kohen gadol or a grusha or a chalutza have intimacy with the kohanim, that will make her into a chalola, a woman who is strictly forbidden to partake of truma. But here we haven't reached any intimacy. We're talking about the initial erusin, where money is given to her to the widow by a kohen gadol, or money is given by a kohen hedyot to a grusha. The Tanakama says she cannot eat from truma, and Rabbi Loza, Rabbi Shimon say she is allowed to eat from truma because she is kinyan kaspo, and we cited this in our shir earlier today. Kinyan kaspo hu yochal bo. When a kohen acquires a wife, he marries a wife without speaking about intimacy, she is entitled on a Torah level to eat from truma. Nisarmala oy nisgarsha. if she becomes an almana or divorced from these kohanim, min hanisuin psulos. If they had reached nisuin, that means intimacy had taken place, or possibly chuppah had taken place. That's going to be pointed out later in the Gemara. But they reached the second stage of marriage, meaning nisuin. She becomes a halola through intimacy with them. So psulos, they become unfit. Mino erusin, if they become an almona or nizgarsha from erusin, ksheros. Let us take a look at Rashi. First, we're going to look at Rashi at the end of the Mishnah commentary. It says, "Mino erusin ksheros dafilu Rabbi Meir." Rabbi Meir, who appeared at the early part of the Mishnah, the Tanakama of the Mishnah. His name didn't appear explicitly, but he's understood to be the Tanakama. Lo posil mino erusin ela b'chayehen. When Rabbi Meir says that an almona that was nisarsa to a kohen gadol, or a grusha that was nisarsa to a kohen hedyot, he says that they cannot eat from truma. That's only when those men are alive. The mishtameres labia psula. They are waiting for intimacy that is unlawful. Avol meisulo, but if the husbands died, so they're no longer waiting for a bia psula. And therefore, the Mishnah uses the term ksheros. Before going into the Gemara itself, very often it's helpful to see points that Rashi brings out that help for getting a clearer picture of the issue at hand. What I'd like to do is look at Rashi and the wide lines under the Gemara text. You'll notice the third of the widest lines, Loshan Acher V'hu Iker. This is an alternative explanation to what he started off with above. And with the marked Gemaras, you can see how we've separated the first presentation of Rashi from what we see now. Rashi says, Almona l'kohen gadol grusha chutz l'kohen hedyot mino erisin lo yochel b'truma bein bebas kohen bein bebas Yisrael komayri. Whether you're talking about a woman that is the daughter of a kohen or the daughter of a non-kohen, bebas kohen kideprecious. With regard to a bas kohen, the focus is on the truma that she was eating before she got married, the truma of her father's house. Bebas Yisrael, v'aliba the Mishnah Rishona, the Meguksubas Igiyas Man V'lo Nisu Ochlos Mishalov Ochlos Betruma. The Mishnah in Ksubas, the Mishnah Rishona, that's the first, an earlier Mishnah, says that if the time allotted after Nisuin, after Erusin, before Nisuin, which the Mishnah speaks about a 12-month period for Basulos or 30 days for Almonas, if that time lapsed and they didn't enter Nisuin with their husbands, they nevertheless are fed from their husbands. Ochlos Mishalov Ochlos Betruma. The Omar Rabbi Meir, Almona l'kohen gadol, afal pi de kidushav kidushin v'kinyan kaspohi. Rabbi Meir, as we pointed out before, says that even though the marriage is a binding marriage, lo yiseichal betruma k'shar arusos l'kohen she'ochos min haTorah. She is not entitled to eat from truma, as opposed to other arusos that are entitled to eat from Torah law. My timer, why is she restricted? The Mishtameres Lebias Avera, because Erusin with a Kohen Gadol, the Erusin of an Almona with a Kohen Gadol, she's basically waiting for the consummation of her marriage through Bia, which would be of the Bia of an Avera, forbidden Bia. And by the way, as we said before, if that Bia actually takes place, she becomes strictly forbidden eating shum because she becomes a Chalola. For Belazar Rabbi Shimon Machshirin, they allow her the Arusa, the Almona Arusa to Kohen Gadol, or Grusha Arusa to a Kohen Hedyot, they allow the eating of Truma. To Kinyan Kaspo Hi. The Imishum Chalala, and if you'll say, well, how can that be? But is she not a Chalala? A Chalala is a woman who has become unfit to the Kahuna. Hare Kolzman Shilobala Lon is Chala. As long as intimacy has not taken place, she does not become a Chalala. Let's continue with Rashi. Nisarmalu oy nisgarshu min hakohanim halalu mino erisin, if they departed from these kohanim either because they died or they were divorced, but they had only reached an erusin state, ksheros linose lekohanim in nisalmanu. Of course, only with regard to the almana we can say that she would be muteres to marry other kohanim. Not so with a woman who is a divorcee. V'gabi grusha, with regard to the divorcee, in bas kohen kshera l'truma, she can go back to eating truma from her father's house. Mina nisuin psula, the shavua chalola. If, however, they reached nisuin, that made them into a chalola. Now we turn back to the Gemara. Tanya, Omar Rebbi Meir. Rebbi Meir had argued with the Tanakama in the case of erusin of almona to kohen gadol or grusha chutza to kohen hedyot. Rabbi Meir says they cannot eat from truma, that husband kohen will not entitle the wife to eat from truma. And Rabbi Meir says kal v'chomer logic. Uma kiddushay rishus ein machilin, a Yisrael that does kiddushin with a bas Yisrael. That's kiddushay rishus. That's a permitted kiddushin, yet they don't enable her to eat. Kiddushay aveira lo kol shekain, where the kiddushin is under sinful circumstances, all the more so. Amru lo lo. So Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, that is Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon, say back, no. Imamris b'kiddushay rishus. If you say in the case of a Yisrael with a bas Yisrael that shekain ein lo la'achil b'mokom acher, a Yisrael can't ever give his wife truma, even with nisuin. Toimar b'kiddushay avera shekain yesh lo la'achil b'mokom acher. It's true in this case there's a kiddush avera, but the same man, the kohen or the kohen gadol, in a permitted type marriage, he would eventually be able to grant truma rights to his wife. So that even though there's an element of avera, but you're dealing with a type of person, a man that has potential truma enabling rights. Before we continue in the Gamora, we have a topic heading the nosei. It's Pitzua Daka Kohen Shekidesh Bas Yisrael. Just a word about Pitzua Daka. This is a man whose organ of reproduction has been damaged. Pitzua Daka, that the Torah actually enumerates a few cases involving the organ of reproduction of a man, but for our purposes, he is rendered unfit to marry, we'll say, rank and file Jewish women. There are types of women that he's allowed to marry, but he's considered posel alcohol. Now, if we have a psua daka kohen that does kiddushin with a bas Yisrael, kiddushin, it's not intimacy, it's the first stage of marriage, and he himself is a kohen. As such, he eats truma, but now he's marrying first stage a bas Yisrael. Does he enable her to eat from truma? You'll notice we have a mivneh structural note where house shapes will appear, and we call this a ma'akav. The house facing up will be to make a point. The inverted house represents a dechia, a rejection of that particular point. So now the Gemara, Tanya. Let's say Omar Rabbi Elazar. We're starting with the house marking. Omar Rabbi Elazar, Omar Rabbi Shaya. Pitzua daka kohen shekidesh bas Yisrael. The Pitzua daka kohen, again, we emphasize he is someone that is not allowed to marry into the, we'll call the general Jewish community. And he does kiddushin with a bas Yisrael. Bonu lemachlokes Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. We are at the foot of the controversy between Rabbi Meir on the one hand versus Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon on the other. The Rebbi Meir, the Omar Mishtameres Lebi Absur Deraisa Lo Achla. According to Rebbi Meir, a woman who is waiting. Waiting means she's done erusin or she's done kiddushin, and she's waiting for the consummation of the marriage. And if she's waiting for a bi'ah psula doraisa, for an intimacy that would be usher on Torah grounds, loy ochla, ha nami lo ochla, where the woman is waiting for her psua daka husband, she is not entitled to eat. The Rabbi Lozer, Rabbi Shimon, the Amri, Mishtameres, Lebi Absula Daraisa Ochla. According to Rabbi Lozer, Rabbi Shimon, that said that even though she eventually become unfit, but right now she hasn't had intimacy yet, she's simply waiting for the Bi'ah Psula, she is entitled to eat from Truma. So we continue at the top of Nun Zayin, Omer Aleph, Ha'nami Ochla. So too, Rabbi Lozer, Rabbi Shimon say that the Psua Daka Kayin enables the Bas Yisrael that he did Kiddushin with, he did Erusin with, she can eat Truma. Mimai, and here the Gemara rejects the analogy. Dilma, it could be Ad Kan Lo Ko Amri Rabbi Lozer Rabbi Shimon Hassam. Could be that Rabbi Lozer Rabbi Shimon, they said what they did over there by the Kohen Gadol and the Almona, where they appeared in the Mishnah under that case and that circumstance. Ella, they said what they did. They were lenient. The Kohen Gadol with the Almona, true with her, so eventually she won't be able to eat. But if he were to marry another woman, a woman appropriate for a Kohen Gadol, he has Truma granting rights there under other circumstances. That's b'mokom acher. He has, and under other circumstances, the power to give truma. Aval hacha, but with regard to a psua daka kohen, he's not allowed to marry anybody, any rank and file Jewish. Aval hacha the ein lo lahachil b'mokom acher. There's no woman that's muteres to him. So woman, regular Jewish woman that is muteres to him. So lo, he is not entitled. So that even Rebbe Lozer and Reb Shimon, who in the Mishnah were lenient in this new case of Psua Daka Kayin, they would agree that with the position that he cannot grant her Truma eating rights. You might say, what do you mean that the Psua Daka doesn't have Truma granting rights? There is a type of woman, and we hinted to this, that there are cases of women that he's allowed to marry, and one of those is what's called a Bas Gerim, the daughter of converts. The case of a Bas Gerim is someone that he can marry. So he too is like the Kohen Gadol. You might say that that's not a point of distinction because he's Yochol Hachil b'mokom acher in this case. Omar says, but that's not so clear. V'ha mibaya boya lo Rabbi Yochanan me Rabbi Shai v'lo poshit lei. The names are worth noting. Rabbi Yochanan himself asks this question of Rabbi Shaya. Rabbi Shaya, you notice we had dot underlined his name on the lower part of Nun Vav Amud Beis. That very same individual was asked the question of Psua Daka that marries a Bas Gerim. Does he the Psua Daka Kohen that marries a Bas Gerim? Does he entitle her to eat from Truma? V'lo poshit lei, and Rabbi Oshaya didn't answer him that that's allowed. So you can't say that what we have in the inverted house marking is in fact you can't weaken that argument. And in simple terms, just because Rabbi Lozer and Rabbi Shimon are lenient or allowing in the case of the Almona l'Kohen Gadol, that's because yesh lo la'achil b'mokom acher. But Psua Daka Kohen, he's not ma'achil b'mokom acher. As we go on in the Gamora, you notice the house marking appears again, and Rashi tells us that Abaye and Rava are coming to respond to the seeming rejection of the Gamora that we saw from the top of the Omid. In other words, the Ptsua Daka Kayin was presented up till now from the top of the Omid, was presented as someone that's Eino Ma'achil B'mokom Acher. Abaye and Rava are going to tell us that in truth he is Ma'achil B'mokom Acher. And once you say that he's Ma'achil B'mokom Acher, we can say, like Rabinelson said, that according to Rabinelson and Rabbi Shimon, they would be allowed, the Ptsua Daka Kohen should be allowed to eat. As far as going further than saying according to Rabinelson and Rabbi Shimon, that's something that one would have to justify. But on a simple level, Rabinelson and Rabbi Shimon, they weren't upset about the fact that she's mishtameres l'bia psula, so too over here, that would not bother them. If you'll say that, well, they may have been lenient by the Kohen Gadol because he was yochol, he was machil b'mokom acher. Truth is, Ptsua Daka is machil b'mokom acher, and let's see where that is. Itmar Abaye Omar Hayil uma'achilo beloy yada. Very terse, very necessary to look at Rashi. Rashi on the third, fourth narrow line. Hayil ma'achila beloy yada. Hayanasui kayin isha v'chaz b'truma. Regular, nice, healthy marriage between a kayin and his wife. She was eating truma. V'nasib Ptsua Daka, and unfortunately he suffered an injury, making him into a Ptsua Daka. Uba aleha, and he then, after he became Ptsua Daka, he continued having relations with her. Loi soichal b'truma, she is not allowed to eat truma. The shavio chalola, the nivala leposula, he rendered her unfit to the kahuna. She was not to be with him anymore. V'imlo yada mishnaseb Ptsua Daka. The word yada means intimacy. If he had not had intimacy with her, though he had become a Ptsua Daka, harezu ocheles, she is entitled to eat. Mishnah beperka orel. It's Mishnah information from Perik later in this Masechta. Alma Matzinus, we have a precedent. Ptsua Daka Kohen machil b'mokom acher. Here you have it. The woman married to the Kohen, who happens to right now be a Ptsua Daka, as long as he hasn't had intimacy with her from the injury onwards, she continues eating truma. Hilkach b'kiddushe avera nami machil kolzman shelo aso halala. So too, in our case of the Ptsua Daka, Kohen shekidesh bas Yisrael, as long as they didn't have intimacy, she can eat from truma. And as we said, that is certainly in accordance with Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon. So now just to go back over the phrase in the Gemara, Abaye says the Ptsua Daka is ma'achil b'mokom acher. Below yada. Below yada means without having had intimacy with her yet. After he was injured, before he continued intimacy with her, she continues eating in his merit. So the Ptsua Daka Kayin is ma'achil there. Rava Omar Hayil uma'achila ba'avoda v'shivchosav haknanim. A Ptsua Daka Kayin that happened to acquire servants and bondmaids, non-Jewish servants, non-Jewish bondmaids, the Torah entitles them, because they're owned by a Kohen, to eat from truma. So he's machil b'mokom acher. There he is. He's machil them. So according to Rava, just like over there, he is machil. So too, the Ptsua Daka Kohen shekidesh bas Yisrael is able to machil the bas Yisrael on the grounds that it's kinyan kaspo, and he hasn't had intimacy with her, rendering her unfit. So we have two explanations, Abaye and Rava, that justify the Ptsua Daka Kohen as being a machil, the bas Yisrael that he was ma'ares, on the grounds that he's machil b'mokom acher. Abaye lo omar kerava. Abaye doesn't explain like Rava. Kinyan deishus mikinyan deishus yalfinon. We have a topic of marriage on hand, namely the opening statement of Rabbi Lazar at the bottom of Amud Beis involved the psua daka kohen shekidesh. Kidesh has to do with ishus, with marriages. So matter of marriages we would like to derive from other matters that are related to marriage. And that was the case of Hoyel Umachila below Yada. V'lo yalfinon kinyan deishus mi kinyan da'avonim. But I'm not going to learn the situation of the psua daka kohen shekidesh from a case of someone who acquires slaves. It's apples and oranges. One is the realm of marriage, and the other is the realm of property. The Rava lo yomar k'Abaye. Rava did not learn like Abaye as Abaye's choice of ma'achel b'mokom achir. Shayni hasam shekvar ochla. That's different because in Abaye's case, you're dealing with a husband and wife that were together under normal, healthy circumstances. She was eating as his wife. So that's different than the case of a tzudaka that was Mekadesh a Bas Yisrael. The Bas Yisrael, she was a daughter of Yisrael. She wasn't eating from Truma. So you don't have a situation of Kvar Ochla over there. Ve'Abaye, and Abaye's response to that, Shekvar Ochla lo amrinon. The Kvar Ochla consideration is not something that we rely on. The I lo tema hachi, if you're not going to say like that, meaning if you're going to say that Shekvar Ochla is a svara for someone to continue eating, Bas Yisrael shenisis l'kain, a non-kohenes, a daughter of a Yisrael family, a non-Kohen family, and she marries a Kohen, and the Kohen dies. Teichol Shekvar Ochla, would you think that she continues eating because she had been eating? Of course she stops eating when her husband dies. The Rava's response to that argument is Hasam Poka Kinyone. There, with the death of the Kohen, the bond, the tie of them being tied together expires. She is totally released. She's a widow now. Hacha lo poka kinyone. But in the case of the psua daka, the kohen that became a psua daka, it's still his wife. They're still considered a married couple. So you can't reject the concept of Shekvar Ochla on the grounds of the situation of a Bas Yisrael that became a widow. Just to repeat, where the Bas Yisrael becomes a widow, there's no more bond to a Kohen, Poka Kinyone. The marital bond expired with his death. But in the case of the Psua Daka Kohen, that the Kohen that became a Psua Daka, the marital bond is not expired. It's true they can't continue living together and they have to get divorced, but in the meantime they're still married. And therefore, I maintain, says Rav, I maintain my position.